a boat, a boy, and a ferocious tiger. Adrift in the vast ocean, fighting against all odds to survive. But is this just a tale of survival? Or does it hold a deeper mystery? One that challenges our beliefs, our perception of reality, and the very existence of a higher power. Today I bring you a complete breakdown of Life of Pi, a film where every scene carries a hidden meaning. But by the end, will you truly know which story is real? Or will your understanding of truth itself change forever? Let's dive into this incredible mystery. The movie begins with an adventure-filled sea journey, first showing a zoo and then introducing our main character, Piscine Molitor Patel. Throughout the movie, I will refer to him as Pi. Pi was born in Pondicherry, India, but now resides in Canada. One day, a writer visits him, sent by Pi's uncle. This writer had been in India for a long time and had been struggling to find a compelling subject for his next book. Although he had previously written a book, it had not gained much success. He was now in search of a new, thrilling story to write about, which is why he had come to meet Pi. While in India, the writer had heard from Pi's uncle that Pi had an extraordinary story, one that, once heard, would undoubtedly inspire belief in God. After their introduction, Pi begins narrating his story. The scene shifts to his childhood. Pi was born in Pondicherry, India, which at the time was under French rule. His father was a businessman who owned and managed a zoo filled with various animals. His family consisted of his mother, his elder brother, and his father, as well as a close uncle who, though not biologically related, played a significant role in his life. This uncle had a deep love for swimming and traveling, and Pi himself learned to swim from him. One day, his uncle visited the famous Piscine Molitor, a renowned swimming pool in Paris, known for its crystal-clear waters. He was so captivated by it that he decided to name his nephew Piscine Molitor Patel, believing that if he named Pi after the pool, his mind would be as pure and transparent as its waters. However, in India, the French pronunciation of piscine was distorted, and people mistakenly pronounced it as pissing, which means urination. This led to years of mockery at school, where his name became a source of ridicule. Determined to change this, when Pi was 12 years old and joined a new class, he took control of the situation. He introduced himself as Pi instead, and impressed everyone by explaining the mathematical significance of the number pi in his mathematics class. From that day on, he became known as Pi Patel. Despite being born into a Hindu family, Pi deeply respected and believed in all religions, including Islam and Christianity. His mother supported his curiosity, believing that one day he would find answers to his spiritual questions. However, his father, Santosh Patel, was more skeptical and tried to convince Pi that religion was a kind of darkness that could consume him if he delved too deeply. Unlike his father, Pi found spirituality everywhere, whether in temples, mosques, or churches. He saw God not only in people, but also in animals, believing that divinity existed in all forms of life. One day, without informing his family, Pi sneaked off to the zoo with his older brother, Ravi. At the zoo, they had a new resident, a Royal Bengal tiger named Richard Parker. While exploring, Pi picked up a piece of meat and, driven by curiosity, extended his hand inside the cage. The tiger, catching the scent of the meat, slowly moved toward him. However, just in time, Pi's father arrived and was furious at his reckless behavior. Pi believed that every animal had a kind soul and that they could befriend humans if treated with love and care. To shatter this naive perception, his father tied a live goat in front of the tiger's cage. Moments later, Richard Parker emerged, viciously attacked the goat, and dragged it into the cage. Witnessing this brutality, young Pi was horrified. From that day on, his view of animals completely changed. His colorful and innocent world turned bleak. 4 years passed, and Pi was now 16. Following his mother's advice, he began taking music lessons. During this time, he met a girl named Anandi, and at first sight, he fell in love with her. In just a few days, they grew close and got to know each other deeply. However, one night at the dinner table, Pi's father revealed shocking news. The family would soon be leaving India and moving to Canada. This sudden announcement left Pi stunned. He didn't want to leave Anandi or his homeland, but at just 16 years old, he had no choice but to accept his family's decision. Their zoo was built on government-owned land, and the authorities had reclaimed it. While the land belonged to the government, the animals were their own. To secure their future in Canada, Pi's father decided to sell the animals to North American buyers at high prices. The plan was to transport the animals by cargo ship to North America, and Pi's family would board the same ship, embarking on their journey to a new life in Canada. With a heavy heart, Pi bid a final farewell to Anandi, promising her that one day he would return. That night, as they boarded the ship, Pi's mother, Radha, requested vegetarian food for herself and Pi, as they were both strict vegetarians. However, most of the passengers on board were non-vegetarians, and the ship's cook treated her rudely. Seeing this, Pi's father grew angry. Fortunately, a kind Japanese crew member intervened and suggested they have plain rice and vegetables instead. Later that night, before going to bed, Pi visited the animal deck one last time. There, he was surprised to see his father feeding the animals sedatives. Curious, Pi asked him why he was doing this. His father explained that long sea voyages could be harmful to the animals, making them sick, so it was best for them to remain sedated. Several days passed as their ship rocked gently on the waves of the Pacific Ocean, eventually reaching the world's deepest point, the Mariana Trench. However, just as they arrived, a violent storm struck. Most of the crew members were asleep at the time. Pi was suddenly awakened by the sound of thunder and rushed to the ship's deck. He was met with a terrifying sight. Lightning illuminated the dark sky as torrential rain poured down. Moments later, he noticed that the ship's bow was slowly sinking into the ocean. Realizing the danger, Pi ran back toward the cabin where his parents and older brother, Ravi, were sleeping. But by the time he reached it, the water had already flooded the area, making it impossible to enter. Desperate for help, he returned to the deck and pleaded with the crew members to save his family. However, instead of assisting him, they forcibly threw him onto a lifeboat to save his life. Just then, in the chaos, a terrified zebra, disoriented by the storm, leaped from the sinking ship onto the lifeboat. The impact caused the lifeboat's ropes to snap, separating it from the ship and sending it drifting into the turbulent sea. As Pi watched in horror, the massive ship continued to descend into the ocean's depths. His entire family was still on board. He had failed to save them. They were gone, lost beneath the waves. At that moment, Pi spotted something struggling in the distance, floating toward the lifeboat. As it got closer, he realized that it was none other than Richard Parker, the Royal Bengal tiger. Fear immediately gripped him. He tried to stop the tiger from climbing onto the boat, but Richard Parker, aided by the waves, managed to pull himself aboard. Panicked for his life, Pi instinctively jumped into the ocean to escape. However, as soon as he hit the water, he noticed several sharks circling nearby. With no other choice, he scrambled back onto the lifeboat. The storm eventually passed, and his lifeboat drifted aimlessly into the endless sea. The next morning, Pi found himself alone on the boat, except for the injured zebra. He assumed that Richard Parker must have drowned in the storm the previous night. Determined to survive, he began scooping water out of the boat with a bucket, knowing that he had to stay afloat if he wanted to make it back to safety. Just then, from beneath a white tarpaulin covering one side of the boat, a hyena suddenly emerged. It had also survived the night by taking refuge on the lifeboat. Pi quickly grabbed an oar, ready to defend himself. However, the hyena appeared weak, likely due to the sedatives his father had given to all the animals. A while later, Pi saw an orangutan floating toward the boat on a bundle of bananas. As it drew closer, he managed to pull it aboard. The four of them, Pi, the injured zebra, the hyena, and the orangutan, now found themselves stranded together in the middle of the vast ocean. Days passed in hunger and desperation. Eventually, the hyena, unable to control its instincts any longer, attacked the injured zebra. Pi desperately tried to stop it, but the hyena, driven by starvation, mercilessly killed the zebra. Horrified, Pi clung to an oar, keeping his distance. That night, fearing for his own life, he dangled himself off the edge of the boat, holding onto the oar for safety, and spent the entire night that way. At dawn the next day, Pi gathered several life jackets and constructed a makeshift raft to keep himself at a safe distance from the hyena. However, just as he finished, the hyena emerged once more and viciously attacked the orangutan, killing it. Overcome with rage, Pi grabbed a knife, ready to avenge the orangutan. But before he could act, to his astonishment, Richard Parker suddenly leapt out from beneath the white tarpaulin and instantly killed the hyena. The tiger then turned toward Pi, advancing as if preparing to strike. In sheer panic, Pi quickly tied his raft to the lifeboat and jumped into the water, the only escape he could think of. After some time, hunger gnawed at him, forcing him to return to the boat. Fortunately, Richard Parker had fallen asleep after feasting on the remains of the animals. Seizing this opportunity, Pi retrieved emergency food supplies from the boat and transferred them to his raft. He also ate as much as he could to regain his strength. However, when Richard Parker awoke, he immediately lunged at Pi. Pi barely managed to evade the attack, scrambling back onto his raft just in time. His heart pounding, he realized he had narrowly escaped death. That night, he spent yet another night adrift on his raft, fearing for his life. The next morning, Pi wrote a message on a piece of paper and set it afloat in the ocean, hoping that someone might find it and rescue him. Days passed with no sign of help. Desperate, he prayed, "Dear God, grant me the strength to endure whatever fate has in store for me." 9 more days passed. During this time, Pi came to a critical realization. If he was to survive, he could not rely on chance. He had to help himself. Searching through the lifeboat, he found an emergency survival manual. Every lifeboat carried such a booklet, detailing essential survival techniques at sea, including rationing food and water, staying mentally engaged, and establishing territorial boundaries with any animals on board. But the most crucial lesson was this: never give up hope. Following the instructions, Pi attempted to train Richard Parker, but his initial efforts were unsuccessful. He realized there was only one way to gain control: by feeding the tiger. Back at the zoo, Richard Parker had been accustomed to eating 5 kilograms of meat daily. But here, in the middle of the ocean, Pi had nothing substantial to offer him. The tiger had been surviving on the remains of the animals, but soon hunger would drive him to attack Pi. With this in mind, Pi resolved to catch fish. Despite numerous attempts, he failed to catch a single one. Meanwhile, Richard Parker, spotting fish in the water, jumped in to hunt, but he too was unsuccessful. Frustrated and starving, the tiger began swimming toward Pi. Terrified, Pi hurriedly pulled himself onto the lifeboat, bringing his raft aboard as well. Richard Parker, unable to climb up due to the boat's height, circled the vessel, swimming in frustration. Seeing an opportunity, Pi grabbed a hatchet, ready to kill Richard Parker. He stepped toward the edge, preparing to strike, but as he looked into the tiger's eyes, he suddenly hesitated. A deep sense of compassion washed over him.